Stand by SOT1.
Standing.
10 seconds. Ready, rolling. Ready, SOT1.
Ready.
In 4, 3, 2, 1. Roll in.
From legendary Uncle Studios in beautiful Southern California, welcome to another edition of Work Comp Matters, the central location for you employees, you employers, and of course we haven't forgotten about you damn independent contractors. And now, here's this week's edition of Work Comp Matters.
It's June 28th, 12 noon straight up. Welcome to another edition of WorkComp Matters. We are brought to you by the workcompcentral.com. If you want the number one location for workers' compensation in both California and around the United States, check out the workcompcentral.com. They've got a free 7-day offer. If you want to pick up their, I have them, you should too. It's only $1 a day. WorkComp Matters also brought to you by turchinlaw.com, 818-230-3110. If you need any workers' compensation, employment, or labor law advice, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Steve Appel. Welcome to another edition of WorkComp Matters. We are brought to you, I am joined by the madman in Munich, Germany, Mr. John Scalia, the socialist voice of reason. What do we know so far as the condominium in Surfside, Florida? At least 10 people are dead. 151 people are still unaccounted for after the residential building partially collapsed in Surfside, Florida, Thursday last week. Search and rescue teams continue to race to find the missing, who are from at least 9 different countries. Emergency officials are also asking people to call 305 area code 614-1819. That's 305-614-1819 if you have any relevant information or relatives unaccounted for. The cause of the collapse is still unknown, but new details are emerging about the integrity of the structure noted in an engineering report in 2018. And John, we've spoken about whether or not corruption occurred when the building was first built up 40 years ago, whether or not there was corruption between then and 2018, and whether or not there's corruption now, because in Florida, in that part of the country, the recertification of the building by state law every 40 years, and this may or may not have been going on as we've been speaking. Take a couple of minutes, John. What do you know, and what do you think about the condo in Surfside, Florida?
Well, there's been published a report that was made in 2018 from an engineering firm. And the engineering firm said basically the building had severe structural problems and they needed to be fixed pretty much post haste. The engineer who wrote that report was contacted by CNN, and since he's an engineer, he refused to comment. But if you read the report, you conclude that the building is in fact in danger of crumbling. And he was talking about the fact that it was splitting and that there was exposed, that the structure, the thing that was holding it up, the rebar was in jeopardy. And obviously nobody for three years did anything about that. They were making some repairs unspecified on the roof, which obviously had nothing to do with the support of the building. Secondly, as I pointed out, building inspectors are a notorious point of corruption, because there's a lot more money to be made by getting a building built and simply having the building inspector sign off on it. So it's rife for bribery. Now, we don't know if that happened here, but the reality is that buildings are not supposed to collapse after 40 years. I mean, in law, we have a principle called res ipsa loquitur, which means it's Latin for the thing speaks for itself. A building falls down and that says that somebody did something wrong. Okay, it's not a natural event. It's not like the tide coming in. So I think the two things that play here are the fact that the structure was improperly built, and that somewhere along the line, either when it was built or certainly 3 years ago, everybody dropped the ball, whether it was due to complete incompetence, negligence, or bribery, the ball was dropped.
And John, you make very good points. And of course, the one thing that you did not say, which does not appear to be option, is that this possibly was a terrorist action. No one's talking about this. Everything's going back to the integrity of when the building was built and then the upkeep. Now, John, Work Comp Matters, we've been going on for 5 years. We've got over 300 shows in the tank. We originally started with workers' compensation, and workers' compensation does have an overlap into construction defect. I know you, John, as a 35-year retired workers' compensation attorney in beautiful Southern California, have some experience in I was going to say corruption defect, in construction defect. You want to take a couple of minutes and talk about that?
Yeah, it wasn't exactly as a lawyer, but I belonged to an Episcopal church in Valencia, St. Stephen's. And I actually was living away from the Santa Clarita Valley when they decided to build a new sanctuary. And so they built a new sanctuary. It was a multi-million, it was about $1 million or more. And they built it entirely. It was put up, it passed all the inspections, and they were ready to bring in the bishop and dedicate the church. When the architect walked in and he said, "Oh my God," he said, "this is wrong. They didn't follow my plans. And this building is not safe in high winds." So the whole thing had to be redone. It cost years of time and over $1 million. The Episcopal Archdiocese contributed, I think, like $1 million to the settlement. There were all kinds of lawsuits. It took years more. It finally got built. But my point is that building had passed all the inspections on the way to being, quote, completed. So even when things are done right, there's no real guarantee that those inspectors actually know what they're doing. But aside from that, as I pointed out, if you look at the Netflix special on Rudy Giuliani prosecuting the mob, it talks about the fact that when he was the U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York, the mafia was in control of all construction in New York City. Okay, and if you go even further back in time, you find that the FBI made a deal with the mafia to get intelligence from Sicily. And the deal they made with the mafia was because the mafia controlled the docks in New York City, and the FBI said, "We'll leave you alone if you give us intel." So it's obvious that organized crime, or at least knows the weak points of the society and where corruption can be at play. And building inspectors are an easy mark for corruption. Now, whether that happened, we don't know. But clearly, the building was not built properly. Clearly, it was structurally defective. Clearly, at least 3 years ago, there was a report saying essentially, by the way, the building's falling down. You might want to do something about this. And so we know that everybody just passed the buck and nobody did anything because they figured, well, the building's built and we don't want to spend any more than we have to.
And I believe, without question, we have to go back to that 2018 report. We have to find out who knew what, when, and then, of course, follow the money. What do you think, John?
Well, we know who knew what, when. I mean, the report was prepared and given to the people in charge of the building. So it was prepared by an engineering firm. CNN today said they tried to contact the author of the report for comment, but he's an engineer. He doesn't want to get in any public squabble, so he declined to talk. But he doesn't have to talk. He wrote the report, and the report talks about the fact that the place is in structural danger. And so, that was 3 years ago, and basically they weren't doing anything about what he said in terms of, where the building was likely to fall apart. I mean, it's obvious people knew what the problem was and chose to ignore it.
And as we continue to develop this story, I guarantee that as we get more answers to these questions, we're going to continue to have more questions and going to need more answers. We've got July 4th weekend coming up at the end of this week. And don't gather for July 4th if you're unvaccinated in Sonoma County. Sonoma County, California, is asking people who have not been vaccinated to refrain from gathering this holiday weekend. If you're unvaccinated, it's just as if you were last for you, said Dr. Sundari Mase, I'm pronouncing that wrong, the county health officer. Just go and get vaccinated. And John, before we go to the break, we've got a couple of minutes. Is July 4th, does it mean anything? The United States Independence Day, does that mean anything out in Munich, Germany?
No.
All right, and that is a direct question to a direct answer to a direct question. John, if you want, take the first news story. We'll do the break, and then we'll continue on.
Without enough boots on the ground, California's vaccination efforts falter. Governor Gavin Newsom routinely boasts that California has one of the highest vaccination rates in the United States of America. But Newsom, facing a recall election this fall, rarely mentions that the state's COVID vaccine uptake has largely stagnated in Black and Latino neighborhoods hardest hit by the coronavirus, and in rural outposts where opposition to vaccines runs rampant. In these communities, deep distrust of government and the U.S. healthcare system has collided with the state's high-stakes effort to finish vaccinating its 34 million vaccine-eligible residents. Just as an anecdotal note here, I got my second shot yesterday. These are places where state health officials believe they can change a significant number of minds, but the Newsom administration is struggling to do so, public health experts say, hampered by its inconsistent and hastily developed public messaging and outreach campaign that relies too heavily on private advertising firms and companies such as Google and Blue Shield of California. Many people don't trust information being put out about vaccines because it's coming from private companies that have profit-seeking motives, said Dr. Tony Iton, a senior vice president at the California Endowment, which focuses on expanding healthcare access for Californians. Iton served as Alameda County's public health officer from 2003 to 2009, what actually works, experts say, are well-funded, locally designed operations. So there we have it. Once again, corporate politics interferes with health. Steve.
John, what time did you get vaccinated yesterday?
About 3:30 in the afternoon.
And is that that's more than 24 hours ago now?
Yeah.
And
I
how
haven't
are you?
over.
How are you?
I'm fine.
Really? So you have no headaches, you have no swelling at the jab site, you are perfectly okay.
Yep.
Got that. And do you mind saying, did you get Moderna or what did you get?
I got AstraZeneca because when I got because I'm in the second highest priority group because of my age. So when I got the jab, basically what we had were mainly AstraZeneca supplies. Now I noticed that there were lines, yesterday there were lines for the Moderna and for the BioNTech jabs too.
And before we go to break, John, from the time you got in line to you went in, you got the jab, I'm assuming you had to wait like 15 minutes there. How long from the time you got in to the time you got out?
Oh, maybe half an hour.
Half an hour. That is beautiful. You're dialed into Work Comp Matters. We are brought to you by the workcompcentral.com. If you want the #1 location for workers' compensation in both California and around the United States, check out the workcompcentral.com. They've got a free 7-day offer. And if you want to pick up their services, it's only $1 a day. Work Comp Matters is also brought to you by turchinlaw.com. 818-230-3110. If you need any workers' comp, employment, or labor law advice. You know, John, there was a story that came out late last week, Thursday, Friday, that in Israel, 50% of those that have contracted COVID-19 were already jabbed at least once. Did you get wind of that story?
No, but I know Israel has probably about one of the highest, if not the highest, vaccination rate in the world. I mean, they had one of the most successful rollouts of the vaccine of anybody anywhere.
And speaking of that, there's a story on our newsline under vaccines. The vaccine made by Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna set off a persistent immune reaction in the body that may protect against the coronavirus for years, scientists reported today. The findings add to growing evidence that most people immunized with the mRNA vaccine may not need boosters, so long as the virus and its variants did not evolve much beyond their current forms, which of course not guaranteed. People who recovered from COVID-19 before being vaccinated may not need boosters, even if the virus does make a significant transformation. And of course, we've got the Delta variant, which is basically a euphemistic colloquial way of saying the variant coming from India, which apparently now makes up about 14 or 15% of the virus in California. But of course, what that means is that 85% of the virus that's being contracted by people is not of the Delta variant. John, how's the Delta variant doing out in Munich, Germany?
I don't think it's really reached here yet. I haven't seen any indication that we're getting it yet. Right now, the Germany is really at low numbers for people getting infected right now. We're almost totally open and almost totally normal. And the R number, the infection rate, is like, it's under 10. I think it's ridiculously low. I mean, we're not quite at pre-COVID number, obviously you can never be at pre-COVID numbers, but we're getting pretty close to zero. I mean, it's pretty low.
That is a beautiful thing. John, you've got the next news story.
Highly contagious Delta coronavirus variant spreading fast in California. The Delta coronavirus variant is now the third most common in California, new data show, underscoring the danger of the highly contagious strain to people who have not been vaccinated against COVID-19. I don't know how many times they have to tell people that. Apparently it doesn't seem to get through. The variant makes up 14.5% of California coronavirus cases analyzed so far in June, up from 4.7% in May, when it was the fourth most identified variant in California, according to the Department of Public Health. Experts say the Delta variant poses a greater chance of infection for unvaccinated people, really, if they are exposed. The variant, first identified in India, may be twice as transmissible as the conventional coronavirus strains. It has been responsible for the rise in cases recently in India, the United Kingdom, and elsewhere. We should point out that the United Kingdom and India, obviously, because of the colonial past and the Commonwealth, have a very close relationship. So there's lots of commerce between those two countries, I mean, in terms of people. But vaccinated people are well protected against infection and illness from the Delta variant. One recent study found that the full 2-dose course of the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine was 88% effective against symptomatic disease caused by the Delta variant and 96% protective against hospitalization. I don't know what else you can tell people about why they should get vaccinated. I mean, apparently they don't care about any facts because the facts are pretty clear. Vaccination is pretty good protection.
Well, John, apparently a lot of LAPD, a lot of LA Fire Department, and specifically the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department do not believe in facts, but we don't have that story today. This is San Francisco Chronicle. Contra Costa is the first county in both California and the Bay Area to publicly break out new coronavirus cases among vaccinated and unvaccinated residents. And the numbers show a stark disparity. Virtually all those now being infected have now gotten their shots. As of Friday, The daily average of new cases in Contra Costa County over the previous week among those who have been fully vaccinated was 0.6 per 100,000 residents, but it was 6 per 100,000 residents among those who are not inoculated, 10 times higher. John.
This is from iNews source. Dying of COVID-19 after vaccination is rare. Now it's happened at least 3 times in San Diego County. At least 3 San Diego County residents have died of COVID-19 after being vaccinated, according to county officials and medical examiner records. The county announced earlier this month the death of a fully vaccinated woman. She was 70 and died in March after being hospitalized. At the time, it was considered the first such death, but medical examiner records obtained by iNews source show a 73-year-old vaccinated man at the county-run Edgemoor Hospital in Santee died of COVID-19 on February 2. This week, county spokesman Michael Workman confirmed another case, this one involving a 69-year-old vaccinated man who died in June 14. 2 of the people were fully vaccinated, and 1 died 8 days after receiving the second dose, but before the end of the waiting period. And here, friends, is the most important sentence in all these paragraphs. All 3 had underlying medical conditions. You don't say. Steve.
Thank you. And come fall, parents of elementary school children will make a decision that's weightier than which backpack to buy for the new school year. Deputize Junior as a foot soldier in a war against COVID-19, spread the U.S. and get the child vaccinated, or sit this one out with the knowledge that younger kids are far less likely to get severe illness than their grandparents. As bells ring in September, data from clinical trials of the Pfizer vaccine on children ages 5 to 11 are expected to go to the Food and Drug Administration for emergency use authorization. Moderna's trials in younger kids are not far behind. John, what's it like out in Munich, Germany regarding kids 5 to 11 years old and whether or not they should be jabbed?
The short answer is I don't know. I'm not really sure what they're doing with the kids, whether or not they're giving them the vaccine yet. I'm sure as soon as they decide that it is safe, they will recommend that they all get it. But the short answer is I don't know.
Then you've got the news next door. You've got the next news story, buddy.
Okay. There's only one drug for postpartum depression. Why does Kaiser Permanente make it so hard to get? As you go on reading the article, you'll see it's a rhetorical question. When Miriam McDonald decided she wanted to have another baby at age 44, her doctor told her she had a better chance of winning the lottery. So when she got pregnant, she and her husband were thrilled. But within 3 days of giving birth to their son, everything turned. I was thinking, oh my God, what did I do? I just brought this baby into this world and I can barely take care of myself right now, she said. I feel exhausted. I haven't slept in 3 days. I haven't really eaten in 3 days. As the weeks went by, her depression got worse. She felt sad, but also indifferent. She didn't want to hold her baby. She didn't want to change him. She said she felt no connection with him at all. This confused her. She never felt anything like this after her first 2 kids, and she worried her mood might hurt her son. Untreated postpartum depression can affect babies' cognitive and social development. For the mother, it can be life or death. Suicide accounts for 20% of maternal deaths. Well, the article goes on and on, but let me summarize it because it really is a long article. Apparently at Kaiser, they give you 3 drugs for postpartum depression, and you have to fail, all 3 have to fail to cure your condition before they go to this really expensive drug. That's the only one that's actually been approved, apparently, for treating postpartum depression and has a very high success rate, but it's extremely expensive, and it includes 3 days of hospitalization. So and Kaiser gets away with this because the decision for medical care at Kaiser is made by the doctor. It's not an insurance company, theoretically, right? So Kaiser is exempt from the ordinary protocols, and they're the only ones that have a protocol that says you've got all the drugs we have to fail with you before we even think about giving you this expensive treatment. But let me tell you something the article doesn't say, which I happen to know. Kaiser is I mean, the doctors in Kaiser may be nonprofit, but the doctors in Kaiser are like in a law firm, okay? And they share profits at the end of the year. And part of their profits, obviously, are based on cost of treatment. And so the more they hold treatment down, the more their bonus is going to be at the end of the year. That's the way it's structured. I mean, again, it's the role of money in a semi-capital, well, in a capitalist economy where there's no socialized medicine. So that's what's going on here. Finally, she got the drug and it was okay, but she had to go through, as we say, hell and high water before she got the drug. But again, it's another indication of when money is the determining factor in medical care and not efficacy of the drug. And it's, you know, it's consistent throughout the American medical system.
My last story for the show is from the Orange County Register. Disneyland brings back single rider lines for most popular attractions. Disneyland and Disney California Adventures have brought back single rider lines on some of the most popular rides for the first time since the Anaheim theme park reopened. Single rider lines return today, June 26th at Disneyland. State guidelines discourage the use of single rider lines when theme parks initially reopened starting April 1 because they were likely inconsistent with physical distancing, but capacity limits and social distancing requirements were lifted June 15th. John, unless you want to comment, you got the last news story of the show.
Well, I just have something I want to comment about, and that is the Derek Chauvin sentencing. You may recall that during the trial, I pointed out that, in my opinion, the judge was a right-wing conservative judge who, you know, did everything for police authority and nothing for Black people.
And basically, he basically split the baby at 22 and a half years, right?
He didn't really, but I mean, let me finish. First of all, as I pointed out during the trial, the prosecution wanted to introduce 16 evidences, charges, or claims that Chauvin used excessive force as a matter of practice. And he said, no, I don't think that shows any kind of tendency on Chauvin's part. Of course not. He's a right-wing, really conservative judge. The sentencing guidelines actually, you can say he split the baby, but you know what I would like to see is I would like to see some journalists find out what he gives people who are convicted of murder in his court. There are aggravating factors found. So the maximum he could have sentenced Chauvin to is 40 years. Giving him 22 and a half, he could be out in 15 years. Now in America,
and the minimum he could have sentenced him to was 10 for the ultimate, for the one count, right?
Yeah, I mean, in America, you get 15 years for, you know, smoking marijuana in Texas a few years back. I mean, if we're talking the European Union, that might be a reasonable sentence. But you guys hang people up, okay? You guys still have capital punishment. You guys, you know, if some Black guy does some violent crime, he gets twice what Derek Chauvin got. And this judge probably sentences them to twice what Derek Chauvin got. Because if you look at his background, you know, he was appointed by a real right-wing governor, the last Republican governor of Minnesota. And so as I commented during the trial, I'm not surprised at the sentence. You know, I'm not surprised at all.
But under the state law, the minimum he could have given him was 10 years, and he gave him an additional 12 and a half years for aggravated circumstances above the minimum.
Yeah, well, even he could read the papers, and he knew if he gave him the minimum, he'd probably be not hung in effigy, but hung in real life. I mean, you know, I mean, the guy can't read, but I'm sorry. I mean, he should have given him the max. I mean, there was no reason not to give him the max.
And how much was the max for the one account? Wasn't it 20 years for the one count?
But the jury found aggravating factors, which allows you to compound the 20 years. He actually was able to give him 40 years.
No, I understand. But the bottom line is, for the one count, the minimum was 10, the maximum was 20, and he gave him the minimum 10 years plus aggravated an additional 12 and a half years, which came to a total of 22.5 years, right?
Yeah, basically he ignored all the aggravation.
Yeah, if you say so. And John, this is why I love having you on the show. We are done. I want to thank you very much for listening to another edition of Work Comp Matters. Scott Walton of legendary Uncle Studio, John Scalia out in Munich, Germany, all the good people back at the workcompcentral.com and turchinlaw.com. My name is Steve Appel. We'll see you again Friday at noon, 12 live for another edition of Work Comp Matters. Stay hydrated, everybody.